In the summer of 1942, the Pacific was a battlefield balanced on a knife's edge. The United States Navy had survived Pearl Harbor and achieved a fragile victory at Midway, but the enemy they faced still ruled the skies. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero was more than an aircraft. It was a symbol of invincibility. It climbed faster, turned tighter, and struck with a precision that American pilots could neither match nor fully understand. When American aviators first encountered the Zero, they believed they were facing something supernatural, a machine that defied physics, a ghost of engineering genius that turned dogfights into massacres. At that time, the U.S. intelligence community had almost no reliable data on the Zero's design. Technical manuals, captured in the Philippines, had been destroyed. Debris from wrecked aircraft yielded little useful information. What the Americans did know came from death reports, and those reports painted a grim picture.
Pilots wrote home about an enemy fighter that could outturn anything in the American inventory. The Wildcat, the Buffalo, even the P-40 Warhawk, none could keep up. American bullets often passed through the Zero without visible effect, while Japanese rounds tore through cockpits like paper. Rumors spread through the fleet that the Zero was made of some secret alloy, or flown by pilots with suicidal reflexes. In truth, the Japanese Zero's brilliance was both its strength and its curse. It was an aircraft designed for absolute maneuverability, a machine where every ounce of metal that could be removed was removed. Armor plating was minimal. The fuel tanks were not self-sealing. Even the control surfaces were optimized for delicate, low-speed handling. The result was astonishing agility and range, but also catastrophic vulnerability. Yet, in 1942, none of that was known to the men dying under its guns. Then, on June 4, 1942, the opening day of the Battle of Midway, the Zero's myth began to unravel. When Japanese pilot Tadayoshi Koga took off from the aircraft carrier Ryujo, his Zero was in perfect condition. He never intended to land on Akutan Island, a remote volcanic ridge in the Aleutians. But when his aircraft was damaged during a raid on Dutch Harbor, he attempted an emergency landing on what appeared to be a grassy field. It wasn't. It was a bog. The Zero flipped on impact, killing Koga instantly, but leaving the aircraft almost entirely intact. For the first time in the Pacific War, the United States had a complete, undamaged Zero fighter. For weeks, the aircraft lay undiscovered, resting in silence on the desolate tundra. When a U.S. Navy PBY Catalina spotted it, the discovery triggered one of the most important intelligence recoveries of the war. Naval engineers painstakingly recovered the wreck and transported it to the United States under extreme secrecy. The aircraft was cleaned, repaired, and reassembled. What they found astonished even the most seasoned engineers. The captured Zero weighed just over 3,700 kilograms, fully loaded, more than a ton lighter than most American fighters. The skin of the aircraft was made from an ultralight aluminum alloy called extra super duralumin, previously unknown in the West. It was so thin that you could dent it with a thumb. Every design choice screamed one philosophy: weight is the enemy. Where American aircraft used heavy armor and redundancy, the Japanese used elegance and simplicity. There were no protective plates around the pilot, no bulletproof glass. The control systems were mechanical and direct, offering a responsiveness no American fighter could match. And yet, this same purity of design revealed its weakness. The Zero's light frame could not tolerate high-speed dives. Above 350 miles per hour, its controls began to stiffen. At 400, the ailerons froze completely. The aircraft could not recover from steep dives or abrupt negative-G maneuvers, moves that American planes, with stronger frames and powered controls, could handle easily. The discovery reframed everything. The Zero was not invincible. It was a scalpel, precise, lethal, but fragile. It was an aircraft built for short wars and perfect pilots. The U.S. Navy assigned the captured Zero to Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders, a test pilot from Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego. His task was simple but historic. Fly the enemy's best weapon, understand it, and figure out how to kill it. Sanders took the Zero aloft for the first time on September 20th, 1942. For the next 3 weeks, he flew 24 test flights, the most comprehensive evaluation of an enemy aircraft ever conducted during wartime. His notes read like a dialogue with death. He discovered that the Zero handled beautifully below 200 miles per hour. It could outturn any Allied plane. Its roll rate was exceptional at low speeds, and its climb performance unmatched. But its engine, the Nakajima Sake 12, used a float carburetor that starved during negative-G maneuvers. Push the stick forward, and the engine would stall. In combat, that meant an American pilot who dove sharply could make a Zero's engine quit, a revelation that would soon save countless lives. Sanders also noted that the Zero's lack of armor meant that a few bursts of .50 caliber fire could destroy it. American pilots had previously assumed that the Zero's durability came from some secret metal. Now they knew it came from pure myth. The test reports circulated quickly through naval intelligence and carrier air groups. Tactical memos were rewritten overnight. "Do not turn with the Zero," one bulletin warned. "Dive, fire, and extend. Maintain altitude advantage. Exploit its weakness in dives." Knowledge turned to doctrine, and doctrine turned to survival. Every American fighter squadron received a set of instructions, a tactical code distilled from Sanders' tests. The rules were simple but absolute. Never slow down. Never dogfight. Use altitude. Use speed. Use discipline. These were more than words. They were a psychological revolution. American pilots had grown up on stories of World War I dogfights, of chivalrous turning duels and personal combat. Against the Zero, that instinct meant death. The new air war demanded cold precision and restraint. Pilots trained to suppress their reflexes, to resist the urge to turn, to fight like machines rather than men. It was an emotional and tactical transformation that reshaped the U.S. Navy's entire fighter doctrine. And as this transformation took root, something else was happening. A new aircraft was rising from American factories, built with every lesson the captured Zero had taught. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat. The lessons from the captured Zero didn't sit idle in a file cabinet. They landed on the desk of every American aircraft designer and naval strategist who understood one hard truth. The Pacific War would be decided in the skies, and no number of brave pilots could overcome a technical disadvantage. The report from San Diego read like a mixture of admiration and warning. The Zero was an engineering masterpiece, a study in efficiency and balance. But it was also a relic of a different philosophy, one built on the assumption that victory would be swift and resources endless. The Japanese had built a perfect weapon for the first year of the war. America needed a weapon for the rest of it. The man who would answer that call was Leroy Grumman, founder of Grumman Aircraft Engineering. A former Navy mechanic turned engineer, Grumman built airplanes like he built tools. Practical, tough, meant to survive abuse. His factory floors on Long Island became known as the Iron Works. His engineers joked that if you couldn't land one of his planes, you could use it as an anchor. When Grumman's team began developing a new fighter in 1942, they already knew what they were designing against. They didn't need to guess. The captured Zero gave them a blueprint of what to surpass and, more importantly, what not to imitate. The new fighter would not chase lightness. It would embrace strength. It would not sacrifice survival for elegance. It would trade a few degrees of turn radius for a future full of returning pilots. The design was designated the F6F Hellcat, a name that would soon become synonymous with dominance. At first glance, the Hellcat was a monster compared to the Zero. It weighed nearly twice as much, 4,200 kilograms empty. To lift that bulk, Grumman installed the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, a two-row, 18-cylinder radial engine producing over 2,000 horsepower. It was a brute force approach to design. Rather than trim weight, they added power. The American answer to Japanese elegance was raw, overwhelming strength. In combat, that strength translated into forgiveness, a luxury the Zero could never afford. The Hellcat could take hits, recover from dives, and still bring its pilot home. Its skin was thicker, its structure reinforced, its cockpit wrapped in steel armor. It had self-sealing fuel tanks, capable of absorbing machine gun fire without igniting. The pilot's seat was a literal armored tub, and the canopy glass was 1.5 inches thick, enough to stop a .30 caliber round. Every gram of protection carried meaning. It wasn't abstract engineering. It was a contract between designer and pilot. We'll give you the best chance to live. While Grumman's engineers worked with blueprints, naval tacticians rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders' reports had become the foundation of a new doctrine called energy fighting, what later generations would call boom and zoom. American pilots were taught to fight the Zero not as equals in maneuver, but as predators exploiting physics. Dive from altitude, strike fast, and climb away before the enemy could react. Never fight on the Zero's terms. But implementing that doctrine required something that no report could teach: discipline. And discipline required unlearning instinct. Pilots had to override every reflex trained into them since their first flight. When the enemy appeared on their tail, the natural reaction was to turn and fight, the noble duel of the sky. Against the Zero, that noble duel was suicide. Pilots who broke formation and tried to outturn their enemy were simply erased from the sky. The new rule was brutal and impersonal. Speed is life. Turning is death. To enforce this new mindset, the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps began retraining their aviators in mock dogfights against the captured Zero itself. Pilots rotated through San Diego, taking turns facing the enemy's plane in controlled engagements. The experience was humbling. Veterans who considered themselves masters of air combat found themselves outflown, outturned, and outgunned within seconds. But that humiliation was precisely the point. It broke pride and rebuilt it into survival instinct. Lieutenant Commander Robert Reynolds, one of the test pilots involved, noted later that the greatest battle wasn't in the air, it was in the mind. We had to teach our men to fight their own instincts before they could fight the Japanese. Instructors introduced drills so rigorous they bordered on psychological conditioning. Pilots practiced negative G dives to exploit the Zero's carburetor weakness until it became second nature. They learned to use their heavier aircraft's inertia as a weapon, to dive through a formation of Zeros, fire a burst, and climb away in perfect timing. Each squadron practiced coordinated section tactics. One aircraft would act as bait, drawing a Zero into a turn while its wingman attacked from above. The Zero, built for single-plane duels, could not defend against teamwork. That was the hidden genius of the American system. Not just better planes, but better integration. Japan had superb pilots flying brilliant aircraft, but each fought as an individual samurai. America built systems of warfare, where tactics, machines, and men formed a single organism. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but its effects were measurable. By late 1942, American kill ratios, once catastrophic, began improving. In the first 6 months of the war, Japanese pilots achieved over 12-to-1 dominance in the air. By early 1943, after tactical retraining and the first deployments of the Hellcat, that number began to reverse. The U.S. Navy's intelligence bulletins became almost poetic in their precision. Maximum zero dive speed, 380 miles per hour before structural failure. Maximum safe positive load, 7 Gs. Negative load limit, 3.5 Gs. Engine Nakajima Sake 12, 940 horsepower, cut out under negative Gs. Cannon ammunition, 60 rounds per gun, 6 seconds of fire, every weakness cataloged, every limitation quantified, every advantage turned into doctrine. The psychological tide began to shift. For the first time, American pilots no longer whispered about the Zero as an unbeatable legend. They began to see it for what it was, a masterpiece of fragility, the final expression of a dying doctrine. By mid-1943, the first F-6F Hellcats rolled off the Grumman production line. The Navy accepted them with a single unspoken expectation. This aircraft would win the war in the Pacific. It was, by all accounts, a pilot's airplane, heavy but responsive, powerful yet stable. It could dive steeply, climb strongly, and most importantly, bring its pilot home riddled with bullets but alive. The Hellcat could take 200 hits and still fly. The Zero could take 5 and fall from the sky. As new squadrons transitioned to the Hellcat, the tone of after-action reports began to change. For the first time, American pilots were confident. Not because they were reckless, but because they were equipped, informed, and united by doctrine. They had learned to fight like scientists, not daredevils. In the end, the story of the Zero and the Hellcat isn't just about machines. It's about 2 nations, 2 philosophies, and 2 definitions of victory. The Japanese Zero proved that brilliance can dominate battles. But the American Hellcat proved that discipline, industry, and adaptability win wars. Every rivet, every kilogram of armor, every drop of fuel told the story of a civilization learning in real time how to survive, how to adapt, and how to fight smarter. By 1945, the skies that once belonged to the rising sun belonged instead to a new generation of pilots. Men flying aircraft designed not for glory, but for endurance. The Zero was elegance. The Hellcat was inevitability. And in that clash of philosophies, the world saw the birth of modern air combat, where survival, not sacrifice, became the measure of mastery. Voice lowers, steady and reflective. History doesn't remember who turned tighter, it remembers who came home. If this story moved you, if you believe forgotten lessons from the past still echo today, then make sure you're part of this journey. Subscribe for more in-depth documentaries that go beyond the myths and reveal the truth behind the war machines that shaped our world. And when this video ends, don't stop here. Click the next documentary on your screen. Discover how the war in the Pacific evolved from dogfights to total aerial dominance, and how engineering, courage, and sheer will changed the course of history forever.